just remind me not to get on your bad side.
Yeah, we'll be on this side.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Father God, we thank you for this beautiful winter day, and we just thank you for all the blessings that you give us each and every day. Thank you for the protection you give our employees as they do their jobs, and we also ask that you give safety to those that have traveled from a distance tonight. Just guide us during this meeting. In thy name we pray, amen. Okay, we have a quorum. Any comments by citizens that are here tonight? Hearing none, we will go on with the order of business. And the first item is approval of minutes from our February 23rd meeting.
Make a motion, we approve the February 23rd Berne City Council meeting minutes as presented.
Okay, is there a second?
By myself, second that.
Second by Wes, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Next item is approval of claims and payroll.
I'll make a motion to approve the claims and payroll.
Okay, motion by Kelly, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Curtis, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, I am going to give a first edition of mayor comments tonight. And that is that I need to tell you guys, and I don't like to give you this kind of information, but John Kreider is going to resign as fire chief effective March 31st. It will be 40 years since he's been a firefighter, and he's been chief since 2012. So John, I'd like to thank you for your service as firefighter. And so we need a new fire chief, and I have appointed Brad Yoder as our new fire chief. So Brad, if you would stand up so everybody can see what you look like. Good luck, Brad.
Thank you.
Okay, we will go on to a tax abatement renewal for O&R Precision and Hyatt Properties, I guess is what it's really called. So Brad, if you want to give us an update on O&R and.
Sure. Well, thanks a lot for having me here. Good to see you guys tonight. Start with O&R tax abatement. That one was for business personal property, so buying machines. And we did finish off the purchase of machines for the full abatement amount then in 2025. So you'll see that we bought 3 new CNC Herco mills, which were definitely needed. Our old mills were starting to get pretty worn, and just like a car, you start dumping too much money into it, it's not worth it after a while. So we were able to buy 3 new mills, brand new mills, that pretty much satisfied that manufacturing equipment abatement of $1.5 million. So that's for O&R. Any questions on that one?
So this was the last year for 25 was the last year for that? Okay.
Yep, we don't have any more.
All right.
And then Hyatt is the real estate, real property. And it was, I think it's been 3 years now, I believe. We've been in that new building, and we've been getting a lot more interest in just people making comments, obviously, now being where we're at. People driving by and seeing things and being right across from the bank and whatnot. We did hire 5 people last year, but we lost 5 as well, so we were about break even. People don't tend to stay at jobs as long as they used to, which makes it difficult, especially when it takes a good 2 to 3 years to really train a skilled tool and die maker. So it's always a challenge for us, but we're constantly hiring. We had a guy just start today, actually. So we pretty much keep positions out there all the time, looking for, like the guy starting today, he's got some inspection experience, but not really in tool and die. So he's going to take a good probably 2 to 3 years to really learn tool and die and how to inspect the parts that we make. But we did have one guy that left that came back that was really skilled, so that was a big help for us. He came back just about a month ago, so that was pretty exciting for us. Yeah, we're continually hiring. Business has been so-so, not great, but not terrible either. We had a few years there where it was really busy, but now it's kind of came back down with probably a lot of manufacturing in the last couple of years. So that's kind of where we're at with the property. We are looking at potentially putting in some solar panels at our facility, kind of behind the building, and just to pay for the machinery and stuff, all the electricity that gets used. So we reached out to, I believe, someone here at the city, and they said it just shouldn't be within either 50 or 75 feet of easements. So we're making sure not to do that. Other than that, we already contacted AEP, and we're getting ready we're looking at prices. We're not 100% sure that we're going to do it. We're kind of maybe 60% sure at this point. It's a big investment, so.
Yeah.
But the federal grant goes through 6/30 for companies, for commercial. I know in residential it ended last year, but 30% federal grant can go through 6/30. So that's kind of, we're a little bit over time crunch whether we're going to do it or not. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you have a beautiful building. Looks like an office.
Yeah, we really
Building.
enjoyed it. That's for certain.
Yeah.
Normally, when people come in, they're like, "Wow,
Yeah.
like this is not what I'm used to working in
Yeah.
a machine shop." So
Well, we're glad you made the decision to move into Berne several years ago. It's been a wonderful addition to the city. Anybody have any questions for Brad?
So on the 39 head count, all of those are located here in town in the new
Yep.
building.
yep, yeah. There's nobody out at the old facility anymore. We'll probably look to sell it here sometime soon. Hopefully, get it cleaned up and cleaned out, and maybe put it up for sale and see if anybody's interested in it. So.
And with the current head count, with the current business climate out there, I mean, you have enough employees to handle the workload that's coming your way? I mean, is it actually maybe?
We're always hiring. I would say we're probably 5 people low.
Okay.
Yep. So just a matter of how much time you can spend training somebody if they're not skilled already in the trade, you know? So you only have so much training time that you dedicate to it, which makes it difficult.
You get any students from the machine out here, or
Yeah.
machining out here at South Adams?
Seems like about every year we get 1 or 2.
Mhm.
Yep. Like Jackson Rowe, he works for us full time. He was a student out there. And he came on full time after this last year, and then we have him coming for a tour here in 2 or 3 weeks for all the students. But the attendance is down there. I mean, they only have less than, I think maybe less than 10 this year, so that's about a record low. So.
Can we do both of these together, or do they?
Can do them at the same time.
Okay, and it's the proper term, significant.
Substantial compliance.
Okay. I'll make a motion that we find both of these in substantial compliance with their CF1 forms as submitted.
Yeah, we have a motion by Ron. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Wes. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Thank you, Brad.
All right, well, thank you. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too. Continued success.
Thank you.
Brad, what's your title and company president?
Controllers, yeah.
Controller, okay, thank you, thanks.
Okay. Next item is the introduction of the bond ordinance. You have that, Dave?
Yeah, you all have it in front of you, I think, or you saw it. This is just asking for introduction of this evening, and then we look for approval, adoption at our 23rd meeting. We can run notice for a public hearing for that night. I don't know what more to say other than this is, in order to get our funding, we have to have a bond ordinance.
That was pretty clear.
And then the rate ordinance comes on the heels of that.
Do you have anything that, Ian, you want to
Yeah, I
step
can
into the
speak
chair?
a little bit to the
Yeah,
bond ordinance here, just to give a little bit of insight. I know I'm playing Dennis here a little bit, but I'll give you a little bit more perspective on
That's
that.
good.
So, Ian Stahl with Baker Tilly. So the bond ordinance is really dictating a lot of the legal language. Nothing that is unforeseen from your sewer bonds, essentially, because it's all through the SRF program. So very, very similar standard language, I'll say. So it's a lot of, and can go into the details of it. There's a lot of pages of the bond ordinance, but certain pledges of net revenue. So by what I mean by that, it kind of details out kind of the waterfall of funds and fulfilling those funds. We'll go through that in the rate introduction as well. But essentially, these bonds will be a pledge of net revenues, which means you pay your operation and maintenance expenses first, and then you pay your debt service, and then everything kind of trickles down, so on and so forth from there to ultimately fulfilling your improvement fund with any leftover money. So very similar-esque to your sewer debt that was outstanding through the SRF program. They make everything very standard, and these bond ordinances essentially allow you to issue the debt through a legal documentation, and the rates are kind of an extra step on that. But kind of the first step is that introduction, as Dave mentioned, and those are really the key components of the bond ordinance. This bond ordinance is dictated, I can't remember the exact dollar amount we have in there, but it's essentially a not to exceed amount that's higher than the bond you're actually going to issue, similar to what we did with sewer. That allows for any changes in project costs and accounts for those. But ultimately, the project that we have at hand, thanks to Wessler and getting us those bids, was closer to $2.5 million, so way less than the actual estimate that was in that bond ordinance. But dictating all that legal language and moving forward in the SRF process.
It's 5.125.
There we go. So nowhere near that total bond amount that was in there, but typically we have a higher amount that we provide as part of what's called our parameters letter. Won't get into that, but essentially allowing for a higher amount so we can continue the process with the bond introduction and any subject to change based on bids. So
And it only took 64 pages.
that's right, only 64. That's right.
And the bond ordinance is for the lead service,
Lead service line and water mains.
and the water rights, correct?
Yep.
Any questions for Ian?
Motion to introduce ordinance number 793 and authorize advertisement. Is that required?
Yeah.
Okay. We have a motion by Rod. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Curtis. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those same sign. Okay, and we'll move on to an introduction of the rate increase ordinance.
Perfect. We'll just stay right here then and continue forward. So, all right, does everybody have the rate ordinance in front of them, or the rate ordinance, the rate study in front of them?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. All right, so I'll try and make this as quick and painless as possible, as much as I can with rates. I know they're not the funnest thing to talk about, but kind of keep things as high level as possible and discuss some of the key highlights of this report. So if everybody has it in front of them, we'll start on page 2. And just to give some quick insight to what our role was with this rate study, very similar to what we did with sewer last year, really took a comprehensive look at the water utility as a whole and understood what is the project at hand, which we knew the water mains and lead service line was the current project at hand. Established a 5-year capital plan typical to what we would usually do with any rate study, as well as looking at the operating expenses of the utility and the revenues that are generated. to ultimately surmise a need or a revenue requirement that need to be recovered through rate increases. So this was all in light of future projects that are upcoming, inclusive of the 2026 project in the current state of the financials of the utility. So taking that all into play. So that's kind of the high level of what we are performing. So looking at page 2 here, typical with our rate studies, what we look at is a current point in time. So we use calendar year end 2025 because it was the most recent 12-month completed calendar year. So typical process. So we looked at what those account balances were at the end of 25, which were around 740,000, and compared it to minimum recommended balances. And what I mean by that is you guys have recommended balances because you have no debt outstanding for the water utility right now. So that would dictate if you did have debt outstanding, required reserves, which is something we don't have here, but recommended reserves in this second column of figures that we have there that come up to $425,000 are made up of essentially what we would recommend in your operating fund, which is holding at least 2 months of any budget year's expenses. So 2 months worth of expenses for a typical budget year. As well as in your improvement fund, or which can be interchangeable with depreciation fund in this stance, is keeping 1 year's worth of your 5-year average of the capital plan within those funds. So what we looked at here compared to 2025 versus your recommended balances of 425,000, you guys are a positive 300,000, which is a very good financial standing for utility and ensuring that we're able to act promptly to any sort of water main breaks, things along those lines, as well as pay our operating expenses. We never want to trend too close to that $0 line because typical to any residential savings account, when you're operating on that slim of a margin, you really can't, if anything unforeseen happens, you can't account for it. So very good balance, a healthy balance, and something that certainly benefits the utility. So moving forward onto page 3, typical in our rate studies, we look at, okay, what is the operating expenses of the utility, which is oftentimes our highest cost, given any capital changes in a year. But in 2025, we had looked at about 738,000, 739,000 in that first column of operating expenses. And what we did with this tab is essentially estimated that to 2026, so the current year, worked alongside CALA to establish essentially a budget or an estimate for 2026 financials. And then at the very bottom, you can see $845,000. That's to get you to a 2028 level. So why do we go to 2028? The reason is SRF reporting and the consultant's report that we have to issue essentially asks us to forecast out 3 years ahead of time. So what that forecasting period would be is 2026 to 2028. So we build up expenses to get to 2028 through inflationary increases. In this case, 3% inflation, which is a typical inflationary year. Obviously that can ebb and flow depending on the economy. But ultimately building up to that forecast year or the ending forecast year that SRF will designate to look at rates and make sure debt service coverage is met, which is a bond requirement. So, and feel free, I know there's a lot of words here in narrative, but feel free to stop me if there's any questions or we can go over anything that's unclear at the end of this. On pages 4 through 6, I will certainly save everybody from looking at each of these individual numbers, but page 3 was essentially a summary of all these adjustments and working alongside CALA to understand costs like chemicals coming up in 2026 and projecting out a little bit for salaries and wages, things along those lines to get a more normal year for the utilities moving forward. So moving forward onto page 7, along with this rate study, this was really driven by the current project at hand, or the 2026 bond funded project, which is composed of the lead service line and water mains. So what we have here is simply a breakdown of what those bids came in and the total costs of those projects. So on the far right side of page 7, you can see that all the way towards the bottom, the 2.451 million, which is the total bond funded project cost. There is 2 components, a Series A and Series B. I think on the sewer project, we also had a Series A, Series B, but this one will look a little bit different because our Series A bonds are lead service line related. So what that means is that $687,000 through SRF's lead service line program is actually at a 0% interest rate, which is great. You're not paying any interest on those loans or on that $687,000. It is straight principal payments over the course of that loan, which is certainly a benefit anytime we don't have to pay interest over a 35-year period. And then the second component to this is the water main component. And there's some, I feel like I'm always coming to Berne with good news, and this is some more good news, is with the water main component of this, the project originally scored 30th on the PPL for SRF. So what that would mean is that you would score in the pooled funding, which is a little bit higher interest rate through the SRF program, but it's still at their AAA rated rating, which is very competitive, typically higher than any community would get on the open market. So that's great. However, similar to the sewer project, with projects dropping out, Berne did end up moving up into the fundable range or the traditional loan range, which is a lower interest rate, similar to that sewer project we dealt with last year. So what that means is about, I think it came out to about 100 basis points of a difference of what we're estimating. So to put it into terms, we're assuming right now about 3.33% of interest on this $1.764 million versus the last pool, and it changes each quarter, was about 4.2%, I think I had calculated. So a pretty good difference in interest rates. And I will say, when I'm talking, and we'll get into this later, the 3.33% I'm mentioning for that traditional loan, we do have a buffer in there just with all the geopolitical environment that's going on in the Middle East right now and tracking through those rates, because what SRF will do is reset interest rates every quarter. So 1.141, what is that? 7.1, 10.1, losing my mind there. But essentially each quarter they reset just based on the previous quarter and do their calculations. So these bonds will be subject to that interest rate reset. So that 3.33 is an estimate right now, but again, we've added in a 25 basis point buffer to account for any fluctuations essentially in their change in interest rates on 4.1. So accounts for that. So where you would score right now if we were in the current quarter was actually closer to, I think it was 3.08 is what that difference is. So even lower when you compare that to the 4.2 the pool was at this last round of things. So that
can keep coming to Berne.
Yeah, perfect. I'll keep on doing that until I'll make Jeff come when there's anything bad.
We'll know as soon as he walks.
Yeah, that's right. I'll have to call ahead. So great news all around. Berne has really benefited recently here on the sewer project, and now this water project of scoring in sewer is even more drastic, way outside the PPL. And essentially when projects drop out or don't come to fruition that have scored in the fundable range, we've benefited from moving up. So SRF has been a very good partner in supporting that and ultimately saving on interest costs over the course of a 35-year loan is great. So I calculated that out too, because I figured you might be interested. If we were using 4.2%, which is an average of the last pooled rate, your total interest cost over the course of this loan would be $1.6 million roughly, which is about a $400,000 difference of what we're estimating you're going to pay now at the lower interest rate. So $400,000 over a 35-year loan, not an insignificant amount of money, which is great as far as keeping cash balances, and nobody ever wants to pay on interest, whether it's residential on the home or on a utility. So certainly good news there. I will skip forward from pages 8 and 9. I assume nobody really wants me to read through every single individual amortization schedule, but I promise it does amount to the project costs and it does account for those interest rates I mentioned.
Hey, Ian,
Yes.
on page 7, before we move on. so
Yeah.
The lead service line, 456,798 construction costs. So that's what we expect the construction costs to be for that portion of the project.
That is correct. And Wessler might be able to talk about that when we get to it or now. I don't know what you guys want to do, but yes, that is the anticipation.
Okay. And likewise, the water main portion, the 1.166 million, that's what we expect the construction cost to be for those 8 water mains that need to be replaced.
Correct. That was the lowest cost bidder. I cannot recall the name. Is it VTF?
Yes.
Okay.
Which was 1.622 million of construction costs. And there's contingency, a 10% contingency that's added on top of that. But the straight bid was 1.622.
Okay.
And Wessler can correct any incorrections that I might have there when you guys get to talking. But that was the lowest bidder as I understood it. And then you obviously have your non-construction, your cost of issuance fees, things like that, that get us to that total amount of the 2.451 million.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Yep, of course. So moving forward here, and let me flip through my pages. A lot of amortization schedules here. So page 13, just a brief outlook, and this is a similar process we follow with any utility and a rate study process, is looking at what are the 5-year capital needs. So what we put together, we worked with John and Kurt and Mayor and Kala and had a meeting of establishing kind of what do we reasonably foresee in the next 5 years to account for within this rate study and start looking at building into rates. So typically we use 5 years because that's measurable and somewhat of a good plan. Obviously utilities are highly malleable in what comes due, but mapping those things out and making sure we're building into our rates to account for those and not have to come in front of council every single year to make one capital improvement is highly important. So there is a couple things I want to note here, and we'll certainly talk about this on the revenue requirements and future projects, but in 2030, there is a water plant project that you might see there that is $6.5 million that we have listed there. I'll certainly talk about that on the revenue requirements, but that is a future project that is uncertain on timing and essence and cost, but certainly wanted to make sure we had that in the capital plan to start really looking at being proactive rather than reactive in a capital planning perspective, and building that in essentially to understand what that impact could be and keep that rate trend, I'll call it a little bit more gradual rather than heavy spikes that nobody can budget for, quite frankly, as far as a residential, commercial, or industrial user. So typical process that we follow with a lot of other utilities in making sure we're building things in proactively rather than reactively. And I think there will be a little bit more clarity to that when we move forward onto page 14 here. So on page 14, a little uniqueness to the way we performed this rate study, because there's two columns. Typically, what you've probably seen on the sewer utility is you have your project, and we're proposing a single revenue requirements and rates that would surmise from that. So in this case, we're looking at two separate pieces of things. So we wanted to break out the 2026 project, which incorporates the water mains and lead service line component. That's at hand. So the current bond funded project, if you will, that the bond ordinance is read through today. But we also, in the second column there, wanted to account for that previously mentioned $6.5 million project or estimated project at this point, and call it future projects. So the difference between these two columns is really looking at the current project at hand and then a future project of building in rates essentially to move forward with a higher cost project down the road. And what I mean by that is taking that proactive rather than reactive approach and knowing that there is a project down the pike related to the water plant. So I know Wessler is here, and I know Mayor can probably give some details to that project, and I know there's a lot of moving pieces surrounding that, but what we wanted to do is make sure we built that in to show what that rate impact could be to allow for the ability to ease that in gradually, and start planning for that project that it sounds like is certainly going to happen, and start building in and doing that more of a gradual approach. So with these revenue requirements now, with that in mind, what I'll revert to, and as I reverted at the beginning of this presentation, is we're looking holistically at the utility. So what are all the expenses of the utility, which about halfway down the page, you can see the net annual revenue requirements in each column. The first column, the 2026 project, that net annual revenue requirements was 1.157 million versus the future project of about 1.7 million. And that delta is that future project that I mentioned. And then we take your annual receipts, which is based on 2025, so the most recent calendar year completed, And those total receipts that we looked at, and these are unchanged in either of the 2026 versus the future project, which is $987,000 that you bring in. So what that tells us and what a revenue requirements is what additional receipts we need to bring in to operate the utility for these projects. So in the 2026 project stance, that was $170,000. In the future project stance, we needed to recover an additional $716,000 per year when that project came to fruition to support it. So two different separate rates that would surmise from that. So in the first piece of things, that 2026 project solely was about a 17% increase or a $4 increase to a typical user. And what I mean by a typical user, the state uses 5/8 inch meter, 4,000 gallons as a typical residential user. Obviously there's ebbs and flows to how much people use on a given basis, whether it's a single family or a single person living at home.
Question.
Yes.
This only takes into consideration the one water plant, or does it take both?
The 2026 project is
The
just
future.
lead service and water mains.
The future one,
The future one is, would take into consideration
both plants, but
Yeah.
yeah, that was my question.
both plants within one plant, in one building, yeah.
Got it.
Yep, and I can clear up anything surrounding the cost on that, and we'll certainly walk through that. But each of these projects, you can see there at the bottom, the two different percentages that would resolve as the future project versus the current project at hand, to give you some clarity on that. So as you can see in that future project, a higher rate, about 72.6% of an increase, or $17.80 to make a typical average user bill about $42.32 with that future project in hand. I will say, you are starting from a base of $24.52. So what I mean by that for a typical user, that is very, it's low in terms of, and we have a graph to support that. So I'm not just saying that, but certainly low to build off a base. So the percentage might not do
But
things
it's a
justice.
significant
It
increase.
is. There's nothing that is to say that it isn't significant, and completely understand that.
Another question on future project and the water plants. Is that based on repair or replace? Is it worst case or potential best case?
Well,
So that might be a Westler question.
Well, okay, so as you know, our original water plant is 75 years old. The second one inside that building is 50 years old. We had a significant pipe failure under John's office Thanksgiving weekend, which to me is just a warning sign that there's a good chance that something like that could happen again if we don't plan for something. And
Understood. I was just wondering, are we planning for a worst case and gonna realize maybe a better than that, or
that's what the Westler evaluation will help us determine that.
if these numbers are in here now? I'm just wondering what numbers we plugged in.
The numbers
we
were
used-
plugged in were based on a rehab.
Okay,
Yeah, we
versus
used the
that-
middle ground. We
that was my question.
The capital plan had 5 to 8 million. We chose 6.7 million. So, and the rationale behind that is there's a lot of obviously uncertainty of what that cost could be depending on the
Understood.
study. So we didn't want to build up to it, total overhaul of the entire plant and artificially increasing those rates, not knowing where that study was going to end up. So wanted to make sure, I know it is a high rate.
Just wanted to know where
Yeah.
to settle on
It's
that.
a valid question, because certainly didn't want to build up to that higher amount and increase rates higher than they needed to be, not knowing what the total cost of that project could be. Because if things come back, better than expected, then great. We have rates that are built in and proactive in building up to that, but not to the full worst case scenario and artificially increasing those rates before kind of that was all decided essentially. So building into something, but not the entirety, which is an approach we see quite frequently because you never want to build up always to that worst case scenario. And then you can always reduce rates, but it's much easier to build up over the course of time, similar to what you did with sewer. I know there's a phase 1 increase to kind of build in, but similar approach to that. And I will say that $42 is by 2028, because this is looking at a 3-phase increase. And we have a page 15 contemplates that. So it's about a $6, a little bit less than $6, $5.93 increase per year beginning now, 27 and 28. So kind of that phased approach annually rather than a spike all at one time per se.
How much per year?
It's a little bit less than $6 because that total, it's taking that total 1780 and dividing it by 3 essentially.
Increase of 6
Yes,
per year.
correct.
So we felt like the capital component increase now would lessen the increase when we get
Yeah.
closer to rehabbing and or having to construct a new plant. And the rehabbing is a conservative method at this point based on the age of the plant and what we're afraid we're gonna find out when they do the evaluation. But at least it's the start of something
Yes.
to lessen the increase that we probably will have to deal with at some point in time.
Yep, it's certainly surrounding budgeting perspective and allowing those phases allow people to understand. I know it's never easy every time you go through that annual increase and people see those bills rise, but it at least allows for some time to understand what that cost would be on an annual basis moving forward and start to budget for that rather than the 75% rate spike in a single given year that people can't typically budget for. And certainly some of those fixed income folks that couldn't budget for that. So taking that into perspective and allowing some of that build up, knowing that something is going to happen and trying to take that gradual approach rather than a spiked approach. So, and I think giving some perspective on that too, and page 16 is we put together a comparison chart of other communities in the area. I know it's still an increase. It doesn't get easier, but I think this gives a little bit of a depiction of just kind of where other communities are sitting. So page 16, both items in blue, or the bar chart in blue, is your current rate and then the 2026 proposed rate. I'll add a caveat to that. We only show 2026 typically because that's apples to apples comparison, because all these communities would be their 25 or 26 rates. So going beyond to 27, 28 wouldn't create an accurate depiction of where these communities are at that time frame either, since it's a point in time. So I'd like to reference that because a lot of communities on this list are going through projects, quite frankly. There's quite a bit around the state. And you can see in purple, the 2025 state average is about $41 for a similar size community as Berne. So well below that, which is great. It means the utility has been managed well. But to have a 75-year-old plant, and I'm sure Wessler can speak to this, is probably beyond its useful life. So it's certainly great that it's been kept up to that point and applaud the water utility, but certainly probably some, as we know, some rehab or new treatment plant projects coming down the pike as a result. But
What's going on in Monroe?
it's a little high. Yeah, it creates that depiction certainly here of kind of how well things have been managed. But unfortunately, every 20 years, or in this case, 75 years, when projects come due, it's certainly an increase in cost. Things aren't getting cheaper, unfortunately. It's great that estimates came back, but projects and inflation and everything along those lines, unfortunately, waiting a year can mean a very big increase in cost of projects. I think we saw that on the sewer utility and some estimates we had there. So certainly want to add that caveat to things too, but just as perspective. So.
Appreciate the work on the review.
Yeah. Happy to answer any questions that I can say the loan closing in right now. And this is, again, this current loan closing is just for the water mains and lead service lines, but it is set for 4/14 through the SRF program. So this introduction came into light as part of that process, but certainly wanted to bring up the potential phasing of these future projects as well as we're talking rates and not having to come to you all next year and say, this project needs to happen now, and we have increased rates essentially. So building up for that. But happy to answer any questions. I know it's a lot of information to take in. I've talked and talked, so happy to answer any other questions though.
So Ian, the SRF process that we have in place or we're working on to your April date,
Yep.
like you said, is for the lead service line component and the water main improvement part of this.
Yes,
So those are known dollar amounts
they are. Yeah,
baked into the rate adjustments.
they are. Yes.
And then the futuristic project that we're all just now coming to grips with is we're kind of middle of the roading it with the 6.75 number. That's baked into this. That project, we don't know when it'll happen,
Correct.
but the rate adjustments that are in the proposal is one for this year, one for 2027, and one for 2028.
Correct.
That would account for covering of those costs unless it's above 6.7.
Correct. Yes, it will account for that. And if there's any, I'll add the caveat, any unforeseen changes in other capital expenditures or operation and maintenance expenditures, which I don't foresee, given Cal does a very good job and it monitors things very well. But correct, it incorporates all of those items and kind of the middle of the road rehab estimate, rough estimate now, to start building up for that. So your 2026 projects, everything is included within that 3-phase increase that is proposed, and it'll keep your guys' debt service coverage above that minimum 125%. It's actually closer to 159, I think is what we estimated, which is great. Obviously need to maintain a high level of debt service coverage for bond covenants and maintaining those. Never want to trail too close to that 125 if you can keep it, just to make sure it means you have a good reserve, essentially. So, but correct, all of those things are embedded in that 3-phase rate.
Okay. And none of us like rate increases, and I think we would all agree to that.
Yeah.
But phasing in the rate increases over several years, I think has been a good mode of operation that we've worked through the last
We've had a
several
historical
projects.
practice on that.
So I think this is a good approach for us.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of communities do that too. I know quite a few are starting to adopt a 5-year approach to things and trying to estimate projects out. I know certainly in light of some of the state requirements with completing an asset management plan, and that comes due by 2030, and you guys have had a plan in place. But essentially, yeah, that is part of that 20-year process, and people are looking more out to that 5 years to mitigate rate impacts as much as possible and understand the needs for capital and building those in, rather than getting caught off guard in a single year.
I think it's always helpful to compare our rates with others, even though we want to watch out for our citizens. But that bar chart that you have, I think it's going to be interesting in 2030 to see where we're at.
Yeah.
We still may be at the low end or middle range because it's a moving target.
Some may
Yeah.
not have
Because
started
everybody's-
projects yet.
Everybody's in the middle of stuff.
You do your projects now, and yeah, you continue to see people leapfrog over the course of time as they start to do their large scale projects. I know in sewer we certainly saw it with people completing their long-term control plans and continuous projects surrounding that. So, you know, you estimate over the course of time that right sizes, and you're back down towards that lower amount. And even with this project and building that in, you were more towards that statewide average, which is a middle point, not even getting to that top point, pending how things come out with project costs again. But yeah, it is certainly interesting to see every year that we put out that statewide study and how that kind of gradual uptick happens with averages, as well as communities continuously doing rate increases related to projects. I mean, it's common, so.
Very nicely done.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Any other questions for me? Perfect. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay, if there's no other questions for Ian, we need to move on introducing this rate ordinance if you so choose.
Ordinance number 794. From a process perspective, we'll introduce it tonight. Are there any hearings associated with this?
Next meeting.
March 23rd.
This one in
hearing.
and 793.
I I'd make a motion that we introduce ordinance number 794 as presented.
Okay, we have a motion from Ron. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, second by Curtis. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay. Next item on our agenda is proposal for water plant evaluation, Westler Engineering. So Maddie and Adam, if you want to step up to the desk there.
Absolutely. Hi, Council. I think I'm a new face for most of you. I'm Adam Sitko with Westler Engineering, Senior Project Manager. My specialty is water plants and rehab and new construction. But before I get started, I didn't know if Maddie had some things to share about the bids and the evaluation for the lead service line project. So,
Yes. Go ahead,
not
Matt.
to hop on your agenda,
No, that's
but
fine. Go ahead, Matt.
Yes, thanks. I'm gonna insert myself. So, just adding a little bit of clarity to some of the numbers that Ian just shared. We talked about at the study phase, the costs were a lot higher than where they came in at bid, which is a good thing. But just elaborating on that a little bit. One, we worked with John and Kurt to kind of do some value engineering along the way. And we cut out a couple of the most expensive components, I would say, of the project. We're not going under US 27 anymore and some things like that. So that helped bring costs down quite a bit. And then still from what the engineer's estimate was, we were at right around the bottom 3 million-ish range. And still bids came in quite a bit less than that. So the lowest bidder was 1.6 million. Now, working with Baker Tilly, trying to give them some numbers to work from, a couple things. One, the Board of Works hasn't voted to award, to the low bidder yet. So I gave Baker Tilly both the lowest bidder and the second lowest, just so that they had a little bit of a fudge range there. And I'm not too sure what exact numbers we went with as far as the rate study, but just a caveat there, that we'll be presenting all of this information to the board to vote on at a future meeting as well.
Just a practical question, not going under 27. I mean, the water plant's on the other side of a lot of the work that has to happen.
So the water
That
mains,
job just decided we didn't need to do it.
yeah, so originally the water mains on the east side of the street. And originally we were replacing the portion that goes under the road to connect over to the other side. Working with John and Kurt, the decision was actually they just recently replaced one of those two crossings.
Yeah, the crossing that they was gonna replace, was just replaced a few years back, I mean, like probably 10 years back, but it's all new underneath where they was gonna go ahead and replace it again, so I was able to say, this is in good shape.
It's connecting into the,
So we're gonna connect into where we stopped on the east side, and it's already going across to the west side.
So we're not losing any, in terms of like looping and how the system works, we're still keeping all the same mains active, we're just not replacing that, it doesn't need to be replaced, which reduces cost quite a bit. So, and then also elaborating on what Baker Tilly said there about costs exactly for the lead portion versus the water main portion. So we did bid this all as one project, so that $1.6 million number is for both components, both the lead and the water mains together. So Baker Tilly came up with those numbers by kind of taking the specific unit prices that pertain to lead out. And so when I talk about numbers, they won't be the same as Baker Tilly's because they just kind of took a portion of that and broke it into two different parts. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense and adds some clarity to what Ian was talking about there. And like I said, bids will be reviewed, and I'll present all of this in more detail to the board, and that'll be voted on at a future meeting to award the project, so.
So just to keep in mind, the 1.622 bid, that's lead service and the water main replacements. The lead service portion, just remember, is mandated.
Yes.
The water line improvement is in lines that either need to be added or replaced because they're old, and this was a good time to do it. I think some of those are in the area where the lead service has to be fixed anyway, correct, John?
Correct, there's some lead services going down some alleys, and it's old 4-inch grid, and we're up in the size to 6-inch for better fire flow in those neighborhoods. And since there's already like, I don't know, just off the top of my head, 6 to 8 lead services in there, it's gonna look like a foxhole all down that alley, so we're just gonna replace the whole thing. As we're going through there.
So anyway, just thought I'd throw that in there.
No, I appreciate that. So I think that's it for me. I just wanted to talk about the numbers a little bit, since Ian threw them out and you guys haven't heard them.
So we were very fortunate in the bids though, because the engineer estimate was, I think, right around 3 million-ish. And the low bid was 1.622. So we were very fortunate in getting that kind of a bid. So,
And again, back to my question earlier, the 1.663 total, once it's voted on and approved, that's what will go to SRF for funding for this portion of the projects.
Correct.
Thanks.
okay, so Adam Sitka from Westler is here to go over the water plant evaluation proposal. We had met with Adam a few weeks ago.
I think about 2 or 3.
Yeah, and went over some of these issues that we know are happening at the water plant. And so that's where his expertise is. So I'll turn it over to you, Adam, and you can explain what.
Thank you, Mayor. I love to tee up, Ian. Thank you for bringing up the water plant and the next phases of the project, because that's a great introduction to what I'm here to talk about. I'm assuming everyone has a copy of the study proposal in front of you. Is that fair? Very good. So this study has 2 parts to it. Both of these parts are to evaluate only your water treatment plant, so we can come to the most informed conclusion on what our next steps are. The first step is a preliminary engineering report. Very similar like was prepared for the lead and the water mains. We're going to go through and comb through the existing assets and evaluate them, but only look at the water plant. So what does that mean here? Because it's just 2 plants, 1 building. That means looking at every piece and part of it and understanding what is the life cycle of the filters? What is the life cycle of the building? How long should these pumps last? And we evaluate each of those pieces to be able to look at not just, are we spending 6 million or 10 million, but what does that get us? I'm just throwing out random numbers. Please don't write anything down or get nervous. But what does that mean in terms of the years? Does 6 million get us 5 years and 10 million get us 30 years? Or what that looks like. So you can make an informed decision on not just what makes sense today, but in the long term and where that'll get you. On top of that, in the PER, we'll also look at the demands. One thing that's been evaluated at a high level, because that's all we've needed to get into until this point, is population trend. When we're looking at lead service lines and water mains, it's not really critical how much the town is going to grow because we're replacing the existing asset. But something that's very important when we're evaluating rehab is what's the town going to look like in 20 years? Because that could throw a big wrench into your replace and kind approach of a rehabilitation. So on top of evaluating, can we replace a thing versus rehab a thing, it's how do we make it larger to accommodate those future flows? So those 2 pieces will go into ultimately providing life cycle costs for both alternatives. There'll be 3 alternatives. There's always a no action we have to look at too. Hopefully we don't pick that one to help you make the best decision to move forward. The other piece of this is the asset management plan. That's where we'll collect the data on each piece of the assets and score them based on, I think we have 10 different attributes for each asset. It's operating condition, its physical condition, its cost of impact when it goes out. And that lets you evaluate not just the plant from a top-down perspective, but to look at each little piece and how it adds up to what makes the most sense from that regard. And if we do our job correctly, those 2 things come together and line up to the same conclusion. The other thing that the asset management plan will provide for you is rounding out the state requirements. You've started your asset management plan with the lead service line and water main replacements, but the vertical assets, your wells, your treatment plants, and your towers weren't included. So this will provide that piece of the asset management plan, which will put you in compliance until 2030. I could keep talking about this. Are there any specific questions you'd like me to get into?
Just to clarify, your email referenced the range and then settling on around a cost of 55, but your letter came into the higher cost range of 65,000.
Yes, yes, so
So that's what you're proposing.
yes, sir.
Okay.
There were a few pieces that made it higher than I thought the estimate would come in at. The population evaluation is one of the big ones. And the other one is the depth we need to get into to really understand.
That just
these assets.
confused me because the email says one thing and then the agreement says
I
another.
understand. I apologize.
I got it. And I appreciate the analysis to get you to a ironclad.
Well, that's what I feel is needed for you to make a decision and not have to second guess or question what you're doing before you move forward.
John, do you have anything to add to that from what you've seen in the last 25 years as far as the volume of water that you're processing and
Yeah, the
so
last
forth?
25 years, like me and Kurt was talking, our population creeps up on us, our demand creeps up on us. We added some factories, O&R, for instance, ran a new water main out to Moo Juice. They're one of our top users. And,
There's no apartments.
so with that being said, with the both plants, for instance, when one plant went down for over a month, we've been running 10 to 12 hours a day. And you're only 50%. It's pretty good. Take one of them plants out, now you're running 18 to 19 hours a day. 400 gallons a minute makes you run that much more. We took out the 400 gallons a minute plant. Now we're running 18, 19 hours a day. We're one bad water main break will not be able to keep up, and we're gonna be on a boil water advisory. So I had some sleepless nights in the last 3 months.
I'm sure you did.
So with that being said, me and Kurt thought, we went back through the records the last 10, 15 years, back through my monthly operating reports. I sent the item. Wow, we just kept creeping up and suddenly, hey, here we are now.
I was always wondering why we don't do a boil advisory when all the other towns nearby, when they have a break, they're doing boil advisories.
A lot of our guys, a lot of our leaks will fix live.
Yeah, I know.
And I tell the boys, suck it up, let's do it, and they understand, the guys understand. And one thing we didn't say, for instance, another neighboring community south of us, they didn't know they had a leak and they drained their tower. That's the no, they have no right, you have to boil water. They didn't, you drop below 20 PSI, it's gonna get boil water. So a lot of ours, we'll do live. I mean, don't dress up, even when it's 0 out, dress up and don't go down there and get wet, and we throw in the truck and, dry clothes on.
We've watched.
So
God bless you.
that's why we are able to avoid some boil water.
Adam, as far as the schedule, back on page
Yes, sir.
8, talks about the kickoff meeting and draft PR and AMP and all the way to the public hearing. 240 days is what we expect this part of the project to take.
Yes, and largely it's just our availability to get started on this. Typically, start to finish, this would be like a 3-month adventure, but we just don't have the staff to be able to hit this with the attention that we want to immediately. So that's why what you're seeing is that, the 160 days to get to the draft PR and AMP, that's what's really pushing this out, is we want to have the right team on this project to evaluate your plan.
240 is kind of 8 months or so. So if we would approve this tonight, do we think it would be completed 8 months from now?
Yes, sir. Yeah, above that, just because I don't like working in days, so I kind of hit it in the text up here. This says we'd like to have that draft in August, and then the final deliverable in October. I get stuck on the days too, so I wanted to add some kind of real time frame in there to look at.
So when you're doing the study, obviously there's some things you can see. What about the things you can't see? Do you have to scope things, or do you just go by the age of the pipe that's underneath the concrete, or
It
how
depends
do you,
on,
how do you decide those things?
it depends on the thing, you know, for pipes underneath the concrete, that's largely an age evaluation. But for some of the larger, more significant assets, we can get those inspected. So we've already talked with John about working with some service providers to get those inspections scheduled sooner than later. That way we can get those lined up, get the results, and then when we're ready to get to this, we'll have that information available. And those inspections look like we could get into the filters, we could get into the concrete detention tanks, the brine softening tank, to really quantify how bad they are, what that condition looks like, further than just looking in, you know, opening a hatch and popping your head in there.
Or how good they are.
That's true, or how good they are, yep.
So on this project, I guess a follow-on question, the $65,000 that we're talking about to do this 240-day project. I know Cal is not here, but I'll ask the question, I guess, to anyone. Would that 65,000 be payable at the conclusion of the 240 days, the project, or is that payable up front?
I typically don't like to send you a bill until I have something to show for it.
Okay.
So I won't have really something to show for this until August.
So it's phases.
Yes.
Cal said there's money in the water department to pay.
So we would pay this out of operating funds. It's not.
You probably have draws though, as you have, different people examining things.
We
Yeah.
typically do, but if you're in a position where we need to hold an invoice until a draft meeting, that's certainly something we can entertain. Standard procedure would be a monthly invoicing, but certainly willing to offer the, you know, invoice upon showing work.
I think the mayor answered my question. This is gonna come out of water
Yeah.
utility revenue.
It works similar to what we're
Currently.
dealing with in the sewer project right now. We get pay apps from Ben. When the vendors turn theirs, and I got 2 of them today that have to be signed and we pay. So whenever the pay app comes, which are in phases or as the vendor bills, then we pay them. So, but yeah, the total 65 will come out of the operating fund of the water department.
Thank you.
You ready for a motion?
If there's no other questions from anybody, I'll entertain a motion, yes.
Make a motion to accept the proposal from Westler Engineering for the plant PER and LP.
Okay, we have a motion from Rod. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Wes. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, same sign. Okay, Adam.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you.
Look forward to getting started.
All right, next item, is there attorney comments?
No, I don't have anything.
Okay. We don't have any clerk treasurer comments. Al is at clerk treasurer school for a few days this week. Under the second edition of mayor comments, we are close to getting ownership of our maintenance building. Sometime, I believe, in April, you think Kurt will be moving in or start? So just a lot of little things to tidy up, and they've got to pressure wash the floor and all that kind of stuff. So they're getting closer, and nobody really wanted to move things when it was 5 degrees out either. So it'll be a lot nicer to do it in the warm weather.
So, no,
Yeah, it's back on.
it's back on.
Yeah. They actually forgot.
Was
Yeah.
it a C? or-
Yeah. They actually forgot to take the
Great, because Cal's not here.
cover of the double stick tape off on all three that were on the back of the seat. So that didn't help any, but it's fixed now. So, council comments. Okay, hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Second. Curtis and Ron. All All in favor, say aye. Opposed, same sign. They went to 5 meetings. 5-minute meetings, Tim.
Can't state that as a paper, can I?